Are you craving a trip on Space Mountain? Well, we've got the next best thing. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and today on the show, I have Matthew Krull from Imagineer Podcast joining me to discuss Disney attractions that continue a story or live in the world of a Disney movie, rather than just retelling the movie. For me personally, I far prefer an attraction that goes beyond the original story, so listen as we share some attractions that we believe do this well. It's all coming your way right after this. Thank you to Robert Scontrino, who has become a Tier 8 supporter of Disney Coast to Coast over at patreon.com/DisneyCTC. Because Robert has become a member of the DCTC community at this tier, he'll be gaining access to live stream Q&As with me, plus a bunch of specialty merchandise, and you'll even be hearing him on a future trivia time. Robert is getting all of this and more for being a supporter of Disney Coast to Coast. It's because of him and all members of the DCTC community over at patreon.com/DisneyCTC that I'm able to continue producing episodes and releasing them for free. So if you have the means and would like to gain some awesome bonuses, head on over to patreon.com/DisneyCTC to check out what's being offered. Even support at the lowest tier helps me produce more quality episodes of Disney Coast to Coast. Thank you so much, Robert, and keep your eyes out on the mail for your bonuses. And for everyone else, you can find a link in this episode's description to check out what's being offered.
In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's time for a Disney Listicle.
Hello, Matthew, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast for the very first time. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. It's a pleasure. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk to you about, attractions. Of course, we all love Disney attractions and rides, but I love the attractions specifically that continue a story and or live in the world of a franchise, but it isn't exactly just retelling the movie. And I'm curious, is this like a subject matter that you've even contemplated before, or was this just something I sent you an email and you're like, oh yeah, let's talk about that?
I don't think it ever popped up at the top of my head as this is something I am actively thinking about as a cohesive topic, but it is something I think about within these, specific attractions, some that we're going to talk about, and then others that are off of our lists. But there are a lot of attractions, to your point, where you go through the ride and you're almost redoing the movie in the role of one of the characters from the film, or as an observer within the film, sort of going back through what happened. Peter Pan's Flight's a pretty good example. You're pretty much just going through the Peter Pan film, but then there are other attractions where it is an extension of the film. So it's a long way of saying I haven't actively thought about it as a topic as far as doing a podcast episode, for instance, but I've definitely, within any individual attraction, thought about how the storyline relates to a film or to a show or to nothing, to an original concept.
The thing that I find really fascinating about this is that I feel like these attractions that tell a story, beyond the initial story, actually do a much better job telling the story in most cases. I feel like in a lot of the cases where they're retelling the story of the movie, they're counting on us knowing the story of the movie. So they don't hit the story beats as well. And a lot of times they just become musical reviews. One
True.
that really pops into my mind is, the Little Mermaid rides, where I'm like, you're lost if you don't know this movie. Like, there's no way you're understanding a story here. So I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, there are definitely films that they count on you having seen. If you're going to go see Under the Sea, or experience Under the Sea, chances are you've probably seen The Little Mermaid. But you're right, if you're a parent who maybe hasn't seen the film, or a kid who hasn't seen the film, and you go and experience it, you can piece together who the hero of the story is and who the villain is. That is pretty, I think, obvious going into it, but you don't have that context. It's more of you're right, it's the spark notes of the movie. So you're not going to be able to understand everything that might have happened in the film and how it relates.
Yeah, it's funny because as a kid, I would just be like, well, of course everybody's seen these movies. But now, like, as I get older, I'm like, you know what? I haven't seen everything on Disney Junior or like whatever. I'm like, who is this character? And I've definitely reached that point of every once in a while, I'll be like, who is this character in this cavalcade? And I'm like, oh, I guess there are a lot of people who maybe haven't seen all of it. I mean, there are adults who don't watch animated movies. So they could go there and have no idea what Frozen is all about, really.
It's true. I've gone with family members. We've done these amazing family trips together where there are family members who go to be a part of the family vacation experience, but maybe haven't seen Frozen. And so they go and ride Frozen Ever After, or they go and do, if they haven't seen... They might not have even seen Peter Pan and gone and done Peter Pan's Flight, talking about an earlier attraction, but they still have a good time. But you're right, they might not grasp who is that character and what happened there. And I have to go see this movie because I don't understand what that attraction was about.
Yeah, I do remember one time right before going to Walt Disney World on vacation, it was, Mulan had come out and I had never seen it. And I was like, let me pop in this VHS back in the day and check out this movie before I go, just so I'm like familiar with it. So yeah, it's something that happens. But in any case, these continuing the story attractions, I think, do a better job telling the story sometimes in some cases. Now, we both came up with a list of 5. These are in no particular order. They're just kind of conversation topics. So let's start with one of the ones on your list.
I'm going to start off with one I just mentioned, just so that we get that topic discussed first, because I did bring up Frozen Ever After, and that was one of the attractions I had on my list. Frozen Ever After, I think if you go and look at it on the map, you're probably expecting it to be like a lot of the other attractions we mentioned. That's just a retelling of Frozen. And while it does have a lot of the same characters, you'll go and you'll see Anna and Elsa, Olaf, you'll see the trolls from the movie, but you're not going to get the same storyline. And that's one of the things I appreciate about it, because to your point, a lot of the times when they do go beyond the film, they do a better job of telling the story because they now have to tell a complete story. And they also, right from the beginning, tell you as you're about to go up the main lift about what the story is. For the most part, it's a very quick attraction. Those who might not have done it but remember Maelstrom, it's essentially the same track and they extended it a little bit, so it's maybe an extra 30 seconds of ride time. But it's really a celebration, in the right after the events of the film. So it includes all those same characters that we know and love. But and to be honest, this is one of those examples of an attraction where even though it is an extension of the story, there's still some, I guess, wiggle room. It's more of a cocktail party, and you're going and I mean, you're going to go and meet Elsa. That's kind of the gist of what you're going to do. You're going to meet Elsa in her ice castle and see her powers, but it's not necessarily told like a film would be told in a sequential order. But for me, it's one of those that is enjoyable. I grew up with Epcot in the late 80s, early 90s, late 90s. I was a cast member in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, and so I have fond memories of Maelstrom. But I have to admit, I really love Frozen Ever After. As much as I miss Maelstrom, it is a fun, family-friendly attraction. The special effects are incredible. I still get chills every time I see Elsa performing her magic and sending ice and ice and magic all around you and let it go, just hitting its mark as you start to head backwards in the attraction. It's just so well done. But that was one I had to make sure was on my list and that we discussed.
Yeah, now you mentioned this does, the story is that it commemorates the anniversary of the day Queen Elsa saved her sister, Princess Anna. So it's not like a super in-depth story.
Yeah.
It's a slightly lazy story, if you want to be completely honest. But I prefer this over just retelling the story of the movie. And I think that the sweet spot with everything we're talking about today is kind of recognizable enough so that we're hitting those moments that people love from the film, but also having enough original stuff in there so that it is a different story. And in the case of Frozen Ever After, we hear Let It Go. And of course, that's the biggest hit from the movie. The other thing is we hear other tunes from the movie, but with different lyrics. And I always find that to be very, very smart. In fact, I always think of Disney on Broadway when I start getting into this conversation, because are you a theater fan? I'm not sure.
I am. I did not get the opportunity to see Frozen on Broadway, as it looked amazing though.
Well, Disney on Broadway in general, they do this thing where they take background musical score from the films and add lyrics to it and make them songs in their stage musicals. Beauty and the Beast does this, Lion King does this, a bunch of them do it. And the thing that's so genius about that is, yes, it's a new song for the musical, but it's something, whether you know it or not, you subconsciously are familiar with this melody if you know the original source. And I find that to be very, very, very smart because it's that comfort of something familiar, but also something brand new. And Frozen Ever After does that with some of the lyrics and storytelling within the attraction. So I find that to be very interesting. And, the tech of this attraction is great. I love the only thing about the projected faces that weirds me out is that, like, all the girls have 5 o'clock shadow under their chin, which is a little bit weird. But I love the technology. I honestly would argue that, I know Maelstrom was very, very popular, but I think if anybody rode Frozen Ever After and had never experienced Maelstrom, there's no way you would be like, oh, this is an overlay.
Oh,
now, this
yeah,
is,
I agree.
It's a brand new attraction.
I agree.
And it's done well. So yeah, that's a good one for the list. On my list, now I'm going to preface my list by saying these are not attractions that I'm necessarily saying I enjoy, like are my favorites by any means, but they fit this formula of, an extension of the original story, which I appreciate. One of which is Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin, which opened in Magic Kingdom in 1998. Of course, Buzz Lightyear Astro Blasters later in some of the other parks, Disneyland in 2005. And the thing I like about this is that in it, Buzz Lightyear is not a toy. Buzz Lightyear is Buzz Lightyear. It was, the original ride came out before this, but I always think of Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. I don't know. I believe this was a direct-to-video special where we lived in the world of Buzz Lightyear, where Zurg exists, and all of these, Buzz is a real character as opposed to a toy. And I find this is super cool. I always love when we can go into a moment in the film that is just kind of like a quick takeaway. And this ride does that. I think that's great.
Yeah, I think especially if you're a Buzz Lightyear fan, it dives into Buzz Lightyear's world and is perhaps, I think of it as an extension of perhaps a show that Andy saw that was based on Buzz Lightyear that the toy became popular from, and we're now sort of living that, or perhaps even to take it a step further, that there was a Buzz Lightyear show that became a toy and also was developed into a video game, and we're now kind of in the middle of that video game in 3 dimensions, moving around and playing it in real time. So I love that it sort of extrapolates and dives deeper into the Toy Story franchise and really narrows in on Buzz. It would be great to see an extension of that, and I know that Disney would never do this. It doesn't make financial sense to do this at all, but just brainstorming blue sky, endless sandbox mode budget. If they had one for Woody that was sort of diving into Woody's Roundup and that storyline, you have another one for Pizza Planet exclusively. I know they had the quick service location at Disney's Hollywood Studios, but to have almost a full arcade of Pizza Planet or something, just so you can really live out those sub stories within Toy Story would be so much fun.
If you really want to deep dive into some blue sky stuff here, I would say take the Buzz Lightyear ride, move it to Toy Story Land, and convert Toy Story Midway Mania into the Woody thing. I think that could easily become a Woody's Roundup sort of ride exclusively. And I think that would be kind of interesting.
Let's send a letter to Imagineering. Let's get that done. And then we can turn Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin in Tomorrowland to another attraction. I think that would be a really fun idea.
Now, interestingly, right now, Disneyland opened semi-recently, and within the first week at least, and I believe still now, Buzz Lightyear's closed. That attraction is not open. So it's obviously not like a high priority attraction for them. So, I'd be up for a replacement in Tomorrowland for sure. So that could be kind of interesting. Also, one thing I want to point out here, because we were talking about Frozen Ever After and, that technology of the projected faces, a lot of people had a lot of hype around it with Frozen Ever After and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, which were, fairly new attractions. Can we just take a moment and recognize that Buzz Lightyear has had this technology since 1998?
Yes. It's incredible.
I mean, it's fantastic in that ride, but it's as if everybody forgot about that or something.
Yeah.
And then when Seven Dwarfs and Frozen Ever After happened, like everybody lost their minds over it. It's interesting to me.
All the new attractions are whenever a new attraction comes out, it becomes the object that everybody gravitates towards because of its new, it might have been even a slight tweak in the way the technology was. And I honestly, although I devote my show to Imagineering, I don't always know the specific technical side of it. We talk a little more high level about the attraction stories and their some of the specific details you might miss. So I don't always know the engineering behind it, but I'd imagine that there were probably some incremental changes from the 1998 Buzz Lightyear technology to the 2014 Seven Dwarfs Mine Train technology. It's a pretty long period of time, but you're right. And practically speaking, it's virtually the same technology.
The finished product looks the same.
Yes.
Is what it comes down to. So yeah, it's crazy. Let's get to another one on your list.
I want to go, we started with one that was, to your point, it was a little loose of a story. One that is not so loose and is very specific and detailed and told beautifully is, in general, Pandora, the World of Avatar, but more specifically, Avatar Flight of Passage at Walt Disney World has to be, when it came out, it became one of my favorite attractions, period. And I think it's the same for a lot of people. It evokes such a strong emotional response from people the first time they experience it. And it's overwhelming. And you can see videos online and then go and experience the real thing. And you can't anticipate the temperatures you experience, the smells, the music, and the way that surrounds you, the movements of the vehicles. There are a lot of different factors that you can't anticipate. Plus, the Banshee breathing and feeling the Banshee breathing is incredible. It's one of those attractions you can absolutely imagine that you are truly doing what it's simulating that you're doing. It's one of those times where you can sort of really put yourself in that moment and feel like you're flying on the back of a Banshee. But what's so smart about Pandora in general and Flight of Passage by extension is how it takes place, and I was just having this conversation actually with an Imagineer on the show a week ago, how it's a story that takes place in the future, but is also based on the past that is also in the future. So the Avatar films take place, well into the future. But then this storyline for Flight of Passage takes place 100 years after the events of Avatar. So the way that they incorporated the aging of the structures and let nature take over after this war between the RDA and the Na'vi, and of course with the Na'vi sort of, as we'll be able to see, and we can anticipate with the next films, the Na'vi kind of winning over the RDA and the RDA kind of leaving Pandora. But we can still see the RDA facility, which is the foundation of Flight of Passage. As you enter this old RDA facility, but it's been converted into the lab for the Pandora Conservation Initiative. And you can see how they really just took this old structure and converted it into a new headquarters for something that is based in conservation and based on Banshee research. And they also throw in some Easter eggs to tell the story. And one of my favorites is if you go into Satuli Canteen and as you're waiting to order your food, assuming you're not doing mobile order, but as you're waiting in the back of the room, or if you just happen to walk over there, you'll see these letters on the wall. And one of them is from one of the founders of Alpha Centauri Expeditions, and talking about how they've partnered with the Pandora Conservation Initiative and with the Na'vi and got the permission from the Na'vi in order to bring this experience. And he's so excited to invite his family through Alpha Centauri Expeditions to Pandora to get to fly on the back of a Banshee and link to an avatar. And it's all this stuff that's based on the original film. In fact, linking to your avatar on the attraction is almost done exactly the same way that it's done in the film visually. So you can really feel like you are reliving that experience from the film. But still, it takes place 100 years later, and this is all in the future, but all the structures are aged because it's supposed to be the future, but even be a future beyond the future. So it's really this crazy time inception. But the way that those details all play out without an official narrative, the pre-shows kind of talk about it a little bit and what you're going to experience, but there's not a lot of formal narrative in the attraction. It's just all these little pieces that the Imagineers put in place to bring that story to life. So it's a masterpiece in my mind in terms of immersive storytelling.
That's really interesting because I will admit I'm not a huge Pandora fan. I'm not the Pandora, Avatar fan. I've seen the movie once. It wasn't my cup of tea. I appreciate the land. I appreciate the ride. I get what you're saying as far as like, for a lot of people, I can get why it's like a spiritual moment for them on that thing. I do not get the continued story. For me, it's more about an experience, but I love all the like little Easter eggs you're talking about because, you know, as we watched video of Joe Rohde explaining it, the thing I love about Pandora is the justification of everything, it seems like even the whole, how are we walking around here? We're not supposed to be able to breathe. And they have that giant plant that's taking the toxins out of the air or whatever. I'm like, okay, they justify it because this is the type of crap that I think about where I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like for me, I'm still like, why does Ariel have a fin in the park when she had legs at the end of the movie? Like this is the stuff that I can't get over, yet I understand why it has to be the way it is. But with Pandora, they justify all of that. And like you said, it's so far into the future, which, by the way, is I love how that's like hundreds of years into the future, yet Star Wars is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. We've got quite a range in the Disney parks these days.
We do.
But yeah, so for somebody that I guess follows the Avatar stories, it probably is much more clear. I don't necessarily get it riding the ride. And the one thing I really don't understand, and maybe you can clear this up, so we are not on a Banshee. We are linked to a Banshee. So why are we feeling them breathe if we are on a machine?
No, we're linked to an avatar. So
okay, we're linked to an avatar.
Yes.
Which is on a Banshee.
Correct.
So we're not riding a Banshee.
Our bodies aren't, but our minds are. So in the film, you know how, well, maybe you might not remember, but Jake and the other, oh my goodness, like Dr. Grace Augustine and the other, I can't remember all their names, but the characters in the film who are part of the group that is trying to make peace with the Na'vi and are actually studying Na'vi culture, they link to an avatar. Their bodies are still in the lab, but there's this technology that's way into the future that allows their minds to link to an avatar that was created, blending human and Na'vi DNA in a lab. So it's almost like truly like an out-of-body experience, but because your mind is linked to that avatar, you actually are, although it's not your body, you're sort of in that body, physically feeling everything.
And you can feel.
Yes, and you can feel everything.
Okay.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. At one point, weren't we supposed to be riding Banshees in that attraction? Weren't there like photos leaked of Banshees that we were going to be on?
So leaked photos are always very, in my mind, dangerous to use as sort of an understanding of what the attraction is going to be, because the Imagineers will sometimes do things that it's not necessarily meant to be that that's the vehicle, but to help them, that could have been, I don't know, I'm just speculating, but that could have actually been more so to help them to justify the scale of what you're seeing on the screen versus what the size of a Banshee and an Avatar are supposed to be. So I don't think that was ever really the intention, and my feeling is, especially by the time that photo was leaked, it was so close to Pandora, the World of Avatar coming out, that it didn't make sense that they just changed the vehicles last minute like that. This was definitely something that was in place and decided for a long time. So I feel like it was just maybe more so to help them justify the scale and get the scaling right for the visuals versus what the vehicle size was.
I accept that. Whether it's true or not, I accept that. That's a good justification.
That's just my rational thought process.
No, that makes sense because you're right. It was very close to when the attraction was going to open. So it's like, that's a pretty big change otherwise. But
they couldn't have done that.
Back to my list. Anybody who listens to the show regularly knows that this had to be on my list. And that, of course, is Honey, I Shrunk the Audience.
Classic.
I mean, this is a 1994 attraction that went on for many years. I just love that we finally get to see Wayne Szalinski recognized for his work as an inventor. He wins the Inventor of the Year award. You know, all of the films up to that point, we had Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. You know, he was always kind of getting in trouble for his inventions and wasn't respected. And we finally see Wayne Szalinski get the respect he deserves in Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. And on top of that, like at the time it came out, I don't know about you, but I just remember experiencing that and being like, there's stuff happening here I never experienced before, and I love it. And it's a very underappreciated attraction. And is it even anywhere anymore? Is it in France still? I'm not even sure.
I don't think so. I'm not up to date
sad.
with the most recent Disneyland Paris attraction map, but I was there in 2018, and it was not part of the park then. So I don't think it's around.
Ugh, so sad. But yes, I love that we get to live in this world where Wayne Szalinski is recognized for his work. And also, it's worth noting that this attraction is the last time that we get the original cast together. We have, Wayne, Mrs. Szalinski, Amy, Nick, and Adam, all played by the original actors. And this is the last time we got that, because the next thing would be Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves, at which point Marcia Strassman did not return. I don't know if she was sick at that point or if she was just like, I ain't doing direct-to-video. I don't know the reasoning. We had a different actor playing Adam because he had aged so much. And then Nick and Amy aren't even in that. So Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, it's an important attraction. It just is.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those attractions that I think it's one of those nostalgic attractions. If you grew up in that right time period and experienced it, you hit the nostalgia at the right time. And it's one of those that you miss because of the memories we hold to it. And it was really well done, to your point. But it wasn't even the original, part of Epcot specifically. So in Epcot, it was originally Magic Journeys, and then it became Captain EO, and then it became Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, and then it went back to Captain EO, and then now it's the Pixar Short Film Festival. But I don't know as many kids these days that know Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or that franchise. But
yes, but two things there. Number one, they're bringing it back. And
Yes.
Number two, are you going to tell me that anybody would be less satisfied experiencing, a, current, fresh print, clear Honey, I Shrunk the Audience versus a Pixar short film festival? I mean, that's just so boring.
I love the Pixar Short Film Festival, Jeff.
But you can watch it on Disney Plus.
But not with the special effects.
So you would prefer that over Honey, I Shrunk the Audience?
No, I'm not saying which I would prefer. But I'm one of those guys that I defend Disney attractions. I focus on optimism and the positives. And Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, I appreciate. And I loved Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, and it'd be great to bring it back. But I'm questioning the relevance with kids these days is the only thing.
Sure, I get that. I just wish it was a real attraction as opposed to short film.
My hope is that the Imagination Pavilion gets a refurb of some kind that incorporates both the attraction and the 3D show, because it deserves it. It's a classic part of Epcot history, and I can see it really becoming another. It was at one point one of the go-to pavilions at the park. It was one of the Journey to Imagination was one of my favorite attractions growing up, but I would love to see it evolve into something new.
Well, also, when it comes to story of Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, can we just take a moment to talk about the brilliance of how that was linked with Journey into Imagination and how there's what is it, Dr. Nigel Channing?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in both attractions. I think that that's epic. I love that, we have the pictures of Wayne Szalinski in the queue for Journey into Imagination. This was a cohesive story when the two attractions were working together.
I agree.
And I love that. And frankly, I want to see more of that. One of my favorite things ever, just to go a little off topic, is I love how Carousel of Progress is my favorite Magic Kingdom attraction, and how that family was part of Horizons and a different park.
Yes.
I'm like, this is amazing. And frankly, they should have been in every park at one point. That would have been so cool. But
and you could see John and Sarah in Spaceship Earth too. Technically, it's not the same family, but you can see them there too.
True. So yeah, I just loved the linking of those two things in the same pavilion. I thought that was genius and something I definitely miss.
You're right. I think I'll 100% agree with you there. I don't think the Pixar Short Film Festival links to the Imagination Pavilion really well. And Honey, I Shrunk the Audience and Imagination did have this really excellent marriage together. So that part, 100% agree with you. That was really brilliantly well done. I love when the Imagineers tell those stories, and that's what they do best. Connect them to other experiences, either right next to each other or in another park or even across the continent to a different country. It's really great how they do that.
That is great. Let's go to another one on your list.
I'm going to jump to Radiator Springs Racers. So this is one of those attractions that I love at California Adventure, and Cars Land in particular was when it opened in 2011, I think was the year. But it was around.
I think it was 2012, but I could be wrong.
It's somewhere around there. Yeah, I'm always cautious to throw out dates because I usually am off by a year or two. But either way, when it opened, it was one of the most impressive lands at Disney, especially for new lands that were created. Not that there were a lot of those, but you really feel like you've stepped into Cars, into the film. And I loved in particular the rock work that they did on the Cadillac Mountain Range. You can tell that every new land or every new mountain that comes out that Disney builds, they get even more skillful at making mountains look very far away. And the colorization or the color schemes that they used on the mountains and the lighting that they used was really well done. Anyway, Radiator Springs Racers is just such a fun family attraction. It's the same technology, essentially the same technology as Test Track, but if you've ever had a Hot Wheels set as a kid, I mean, this is truly just putting you in a Hot Wheels set and incorporating it into the Cars film, and you race against another vehicle. That is so much fun. And the fact that it's always going to be a really close race, which is nice. They don't let one totally cream the other car, but either way you get to win or to lose, and it's just a fun little racing competition, even though you're not in control, but it's just a fun experience. But anyway, the story for this is it takes place after the events of Cars, and it's race day at Radiator Springs. And they are, of course, making you a part of race day. So you get into one of these cars and you go through Radiator Springs. And part of it that is, I think, where the story gets a little loose is the beginning, because you really are kind of reliving Lightning McQueen's entry into Radiator Springs in the film. And then at some point it sidetracks, and now it's all of a sudden race day at Radiator Springs. But then even you get to go to Luigi's to get a fresh set of white wall tires, or you go into Ramon's and get a fresh paint job, and the technology used for that to make it look like that really happened is very clever. But it's just one of those attractions that from especially the combination of the technology, the rock work, the animatronic technology, and the loose but fun, it's more of a Frozen Ever After kind of loose storyline, but the loose but still really fun storyline is one that I really love experiencing whenever I go out to the West Coast.
Yeah, it is a fantastic land. I love it. I love the attraction as well. There are two things that you've touched upon them a little, but one of them is I never understand why we're driving through Radiator Springs if we just walked through it to get to the ride.
Yeah.
It's like, what's up with that? And then also, if you're riding it during the day, the daytime to nighttime transition, I'm always like, why is it night all of a sudden? And frankly, how cool would it have been if they had done lighting in the attraction that changed throughout the day, depending on when you rode it, considering the beginning and end are in whatever the real daylight is. But agreed, it's a very simple story. It's race day at Radiator Springs. It works. I don't question that part of it at all. And, it's an epic attraction on a grand scale. The land was just such a game changer. I feel like I've been saying that so much lately, but it was such a game changer for the Disneyland Resort. It's just a stunning land.
They did an amazing job with it. It's a reason to go to California. It's a reason to go, one of the many reasons to go to Disneyland. But I think Disney kind of learned from that too, the night versus day, because you're right, especially with Galaxy's Edge, when you experience both attractions, depending on the time of day, the experience changes. So I feel like they sort of took note of that. I feel like that was maybe one of the takeaways from things like Radiator Springs Racers, that how do you go from if it is the daytime into a nighttime part of the experience and then back to day? It's like you've been driving through Radiator Springs for 24 hours to get back to the day. So they learned from their mistakes, or at least find ways to make the experiences even more realistic.
Yeah, and frankly, it's one of those things is like, well, you shouldn't really, if that's what you're thinking about, they really failed, on your first ride. And this is nerds overstudying things, right? That's what it comes down to.
Exactly.
But let's stay at Disney California Adventure for a second and talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, which have you had a chance to experience it?
Yes, but no. So I am a person who gets motion sick pretty easily, so I already knew going in I was not going to be able to do Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout happily. So I walked through the queue experience with my family, and then they did the attraction. Those who were able to do it did the attraction. But I've seen countless POVs that, again, videos don't do anything justice, but I at least understand the premise of it.
Okay, I love how good the story, like how easy the story is to follow. Earlier we were talking about even how some of the attractions that are just telling the story of the movie, it's difficult to understand the story. In this case, this is one of the clearest storylines, whether or not you like it, regardless. It's one of the clearest stories told in a Disney attraction in my mind. And it's not a simple story like it's Celebration Day or it's Racing Day. Like there's actually a story, but it's very clear. And maybe that's just because there's enough time for pre-shows that the moment with the rocket animatronic, it's very simple to follow. And, for an attraction that took over an old ride system, I give this attraction a standing ovation. And listen, I'm not saying I want it to take over Tower at Hollywood Studios. I certainly don't. But for what they did at Disney California Adventure, I love it so much. And it's such a fun ride. And I love in the Imagineering story when Joe Rohde talks about, he's like, this ride system does one thing and one thing only. So we decided to take, instead of fear, we made it like whimsical and that feeling of being tossed up in the air as a baby. And I was like, that is like so stupidly simple, yet genius. Because I would have never thought to myself, yeah, let's take a ride system that throws you up and down and make it feel like a baby being thrown in the air. And that's exactly what it does.
It's a Joe Rohdeism. Like he's able to come up with, well, not only him, but he's really brilliant at coming up with such simple but profound concepts like that. You're right. Not many people would think that's a very clear way to turn a fear-based attraction into a joy-based attraction or a whimsical-based attraction. But I also love how we talked earlier about maybe not everyone's seen Little Mermaid, but chances are most people who go to Disney probably have. It is a pretty big movie, and it's obviously decades old at this point. But I think fewer people have seen Guardians of the Galaxy than especially The Little Mermaid. And for them to even incorporate who Rocket is into the pre-show, for those not paying attention, the name's Rocket, one of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Just a very simple, way to throw that in. You know who it is, what his role is, and you already can understand his personality from the pre-show. The animatronic's great, but it is a very clear storyline, and there's still a factor of rewritability because each sequence you get one of several soundtracks. You get different effects that come up, I believe. And I know that they throw a lot of Easter eggs into the attraction too that are not easy to find the first time you experience it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Even in the queue, there's tons of Easter eggs and everything. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, I've seen Guardians of the Galaxy once, and I would say although I enjoyed it, it's not like a memorable movie to me. I don't remember specific scenes or anything from it, yet it's very clear, that attraction. The story is just very, very clear.
Yeah.
And I love that about it. And it never feels like forced either. I don't know. It just feels organic and clear. And honestly, now that I think about it, it might be one of the best told stories in a Disney ride. Once again, put aside the fact of whether or not you like the story, the way it's told is simple and clear and organic.
I agree. It is very well done. You can tell Joe Rohde had his handprints in it. It was, or at least had some influence on the attraction. But it is a really well told story, which is what we look up to the Imagineers usually for doing, telling really great stories.
Yeah. Let's get to another one on your list.
So speaking of great stories, I'm going to go to a classic attraction. We're staying on the West Coast still. I'm going to stay with Indiana Jones Adventure. This was a mid-90s attraction that was created by Tony Baxter, sort of the lead Imagineer behind the project. And it was one of those, again, early partnerships between Disney and Lucasfilm. We first had Star Tours, and this is sort of an extension of that. And the story is also really well told through details. In the outside of the attraction, if you're there long enough, there is a storyline that's incorporated into the queue loop. It's about a 30-minute loop, and chances are that's where most of the wait happens, is outside. And so if you are paying attention, you'll hear some of those those things about Temple of the Forbidden Eye and about Indiana Jones, and so you kind of understand the premise of it is. And then you used to go into the pre-show. That's really where they kind of introduce the concept a little bit more. And it does take place after the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Indiana Jones is more of a famous character at this point. And he's discovered this ancient temple that's supposed to be roughly somewhere in India, but somewhere in South Asia, Temple of the Forbidden Eye, where there's this idol, Mara, who is supposed to be able to present you with visions of the future, with eternal riches, or with eternal youth. And the only caveat, of course, is you're not supposed to look into the eyes of the idol, or else you'll be cursed and not get these gifts. We hear in the pre-show and through also the Q loop that Indy is lost in the temple, and Salah's worried. He doesn't know why Indy's lost in the temple. He hasn't been able to find him. That these tourists have gone missing as well, but that all these tourists are flocking to the temple to try to get one of these amazing gifts from the idol and see if the rumors are true. And then, of course, you board the vehicle, and very quickly you come across the Chamber of Destiny. Nevertheless, it might not be you, but someone in your car is going to be looking into the eyes of the idol, and at that point, it becomes, well, now we need to get out of here. And that's where we encounter Indiana Jones, and he's there to help you alongside Salah, at least as a emotional guide to help to get you through the attraction. It was one of those that was really grand in concept, and if you've seen the concept art, they had these big ideas, and even some of the original special effects. There was falling ice at one point. They had to turn that effect off pretty quickly because it was prone to maintenance issues. It didn't work very well, but the Imagineers do that. They dream big, and then reality hits, and they sometimes have to scale it back a bit. But all the details in that attraction, the way the story is told, it's so thrilling. They incorporate music from all of the films, at least if I remember off the top of my head, Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Temple of Doom, has some of the music from there. Some familiar traps that you see in Indiana Jones movies, especially the boulder effect, which is one of the most brilliant ones in the attraction. But it's one of those masterpiece attractions that to this day is still such a blast to experience. So I had to put it on here. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's still absolutely one of my favorites. And the thing that you touched on here that I actually want to tie into your other choice, which is Star Wars Rise of the Resistance, because the thing that I love so much about Indiana Jones Adventure Temple of the Forbidden Eye is that it does not live in an Indiana Jones movie, yet it 100% feels like an Indiana Jones movie. And it's, once again, we were talking about this with Frozen Ever After in the music, but with Indy, there needs the familiarity of like the boulder and other key moments, the snake, these moments that we know from the films are in this attraction. And therefore it's, I don't know anybody who hasn't accepted that attraction and felt like, oh, it 100% lives in the world of these movies. And that brings us to kind of Star Wars Rise of the Resistance, but honestly more as a whole Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, because, that got a lot more criticism for not feeling enough like a Star Wars movie. And the thing that's so interesting to me with that is, first of all, I still stand by the fact that I think it was a smart decision to make it an original planet, because the Star Wars nerds would go crazy over inconsistency, I believe. So I do think it was the right decision. And you can see that they took that theory of give enough familiarity with the Millennium Falcon or a place like Oga's Cantina that is very reminiscent of the cantina in the film. But for some reason, it didn't translate as well in Galaxy's Edge. But I would argue that Star Wars Rise of the Resistance kind of that as a standalone thing does. Yeah, that definitely does. Do you want me to dive into Star Wars Rise of the Resistance now? Okay. Yeah, let's get into, let's do that one.
That was the sort of top on my list. So.
Did I ruin your finale?
No, not at all. You set me up perfectly. But I agree. I also agree with you that I think it was a smart choice, and not so partially because you're right. There's going to be some inconsistencies and some things that, especially the really serious Star Wars fans, are going to notice. And it needs to be for non-Star Wars fans as much as for Star Wars fans. And the other idea that I really liked about it that did make sense, which I believe was also in the Imagineering story, but I could be mistaken where I heard this, is that they wanted you to, it also could have been from D23, but they wanted you to live out your own Star Wars story and to make you really feel like Rey did in the film or feel like Luke did in the film, of being transported off of your home planet for the first time and going to a completely new place where they don't speak your language, where you're unfamiliar with how to get around, with with the First Order being there and the Resistance being there and being somehow caught in the middle and encountering them in very haphazard ways, is very reminiscent of a Star Wars movie, but not a particular Star Wars movie. I think probably what the difference is between that and Indiana Jones, to your point, is that there is a lot more things that are reminiscent of Indiana Jones in Indiana Jones Adventure, including the music. But yeah, Star Wars Rise of the Resistance is supposed to take place, and Galaxy's Edge is supposed to take place between the events of The Last Jedi, which is episode 8, and The Rise of Skywalker, which is episode 9. And so we get those same characters. I love that they brought Rey back, and Finn, and Poe, and they introduced some new characters like Lieutenant Beck and the R5 droids. The vehicles of Star Wars Rise of Resistance are amazing. Oh, and I didn't mention Kylo Ren, of course. We have Kylo Ren in there as well. But it really is very reminiscent of a Star Wars movie, but it's not from a particular Star Wars movie. It's sort of your own Star Wars movie. We're all familiar with, if you've seen Star Wars, the scene where the Resistance is attempting to do something, they get captured by the First Order. They're now having to escape the First Order. There's close encounters with Kylo Ren or with Darth Vader in the original films where you just narrowly escape, but you just happen to get there because the Resistance happens to just come together in just the right way at just the right time. They did incorporate music from, I counted at least six Star Wars films, if not all 9, because of the main Star Wars theme being incorporated in there. But they really did their homework with Rise of the Resistance, and it paid off. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, 2 things there. Number 1, I think it's awesome that it's like official Star Wars canon. You said it takes place between episode 8 and 9, and yes, it's your own adventure, but like this is official Star Wars canon at this point, which is really, really cool. The other thing, and you touched upon it, you talk a lot about the music you mentioned, not only in Indiana Jones, but also Rise of the Resistance, and you even counted the amount of films they're in. I think that's the familiar element missing from Galaxy's Edge that honestly would change dividends.
Yes.
If we heard some of that John Williams score, and I get it, they have radio stations playing things, and of course the Cantina has music, but listen, I always go back to this. I am not a Harry Potter fan when it comes to the fans and stuff. But when I turned the corner for the first time and saw Hogwarts and heard that John Williams score swell, I am literally getting goosebumps right now thinking about it. It's a moment. So can you imagine turning the corner and seeing the Millennium Falcon with that music swelling? I think it would change everything. And I get why it's not there. I get why we hear spaceships instead. And I appreciate it. But I think that that's the fix, honestly. And I hope that in the future, maybe we'll see that, like maybe for special events and stuff. They'll have some Star Wars special events at Galaxy's Edge After Hours or something and incorporate music. And then I do appreciate what they were doing, but it just doesn't hit the same way. And I am a much bigger Star Wars fan than Harry Potter fan.
Yeah, it would be. The music is definitely probably a missing piece there. I agree. The nice thing is that it is, and I think Bob Chapek said it's kind of a canvas where they could always continue to add things to it, and perhaps they will.
Sure.
But yeah, there's it's such little tweaks that they need to make it feel even more like Star Wars or like a familiar Star Wars story. So. Yeah, I'll piggyback on what you said there. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, let's stick with Star Wars for a second and hop over to something much older, and that's Star Tours, more specifically Star Tours The Adventures Continue. I find this really interesting because, this is the first time, that was it, 1986 with the original attraction, and listen, the timeline of this attraction is admittedly wonky, certainly not canon like Rise of the Resistance, but for me, it was the first time I thought, oh, this is like a real world of people. There are tourists going on Star Tours. This entire world isn't just people battling all of the time, even though we do get into a battle in the attraction, but I don't know, to me, that real world element of there are people who just want to tour the galaxy is a continued story beyond the films that I hadn't really thought about and is an exciting idea, and once again has enough familiar things in it that really excites Star Wars fans who get to experience this.
I think to your point earlier, Star Tours might feel more like Star Wars than Star Wars Galaxy's Edge even though Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is meant to be told like a Star Wars story, they throw in so many familiar elements into Star Tours. And even just seeing R2-D2 and C-3PO when you enter the queue, I mean, that's enough that you're like, all right, this is Star Wars. I get it. So, but they throw in so many familiar elements in the planets that you can visit on Star Tours. Seeing Darth Vader or Yoda, or there's just a lot that they throw in there that feels very familiar and comforting as a Star Wars fan.
Yeah, especially now. But even with the original, I love just the battle of like going into the trenches and stuff. Like these are all very familiar images from the films. Even though we're not reliving that moment in the film. This is a different moment. This isn't a continued story. Yet it's super familiar. And once again, that is the sweet spot, I feel like. People, what do they say? People don't know what they want until you tell them.
Yeah.
If you say you're going to do something brand spanking new, it's very hard to convince people of that until you show it to them. And then or you can't just ask people, what do you want? They don't know. You have to tell them what they want. And it's the sweet spot. Familiar, yet new. And Star Tours, I think, does that really well in a continued story way.
Yeah, still very much a fun attraction to this day. I think it's a staple. It's a classic at Disneyland and at Hollywood Studios.
For sure. And even though it's hard with it in Disneyland now, the spreading of Star Wars across the entire park is still a hard thing. But yeah, I hope they connect it to Galaxy's Edge and Hollywood Studios somehow. It's so close to it.
I want them to, but I also don't want them to get rid of Muppets. So it's hard. Like maybe go around the back or like through Grand Avenue or something.
Listen, an underground tunnel. I keep saying let's go blue sky for a second. I keep saying I want to load it in Tomorrowland at Disneyland and end up in Galaxy's Edge. That's the ultimate dream. That's where the unload is. Yeah. Now, so we got to the 5 on your list, I believe, right?
Yes, we're all good on my list. I think we have one left on yours, though.
We do have one left, and unfortunately, we're ending on a very unpopular attraction here, but hear me out. Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor, I mean, really continues the story well.
It really does.
Whether or not you like the attraction, once again, at the end of the movie Monsters, Inc., we find out that children's laughs are more powerful than their screams, and therefore we get the Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor, where the whole purpose is to gather the laughs. And now I even love the fact that this is being continued with Monsters at Work coming to Disney Plus very, very soon. So yeah, that continued story, it just lives there, regardless of what you think of the attraction. It lives there, and that's really cool. Once again, I will always prefer something with a new original story versus a retelling of a story. Always.
And Disney's giving us a lot more of that these days, too, which I think is great. But Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor it's one of those attractions that for especially people who have not been to Disney before, I like taking them on the experience because it's interactive, it's fun. There's a good chance they'll be called out. I've been called out before. It's like I'm an introvert. I hate being called out on things, but it's one of the few times I'm like, all right, I'll play along, and it was actually a lot of fun. But it is so clever, right? It's to your point. We've discovered that laughter is more powerful than screams, and what a better way to do that than to bring a whole room of guests together and make them laugh to help power our city. Give them a show. Give them a comedy show. It's family friendly. It's kid friendly. They'll even take out some of the kids' jokes, which aren't usually the best jokes in the world, but it makes them happy, and it's still corny and funny, and it's just a lot of fun. And it still has the live performer element too, which is great.
For sure. Now, this has been a super fun, super nerdy conversation. Is there anything else you want to add before we get to some trivia?
I guess the only thing I would say is just keep, as you're in the parks, for those of you listening, just look out for these stories and think about, is this an original story that's an extension of a film? Is it a retelling of a story from a film? And there's also the completely separate original concepts, but all those stories are out there. Everything in Disney has a story. So just a matter of trying to figure out and uncover through all the details what that story is.
Exactly. So fantastic. Now it's time, I think, for some trivia.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
All right, Matt, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
You know what? You can hit me with your trivia question first.
Okay, this is probably much easier than the one that you got for me. But earlier I mentioned Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, which was the animated series that Buzz Lightyear was an actual character as opposed to a toy. Of course, we know that Tim Allen is the voice of Buzz Lightyear in the movies, but do you know who voices Buzz on that series and in various other Buzz Lightyear projects?
You stumped me. I actually do not know the voice actor.
Oh, wow. He's famous, and he's part of a very iconic Disney attraction.
Still don't know.
Or I think Soren.
Oh, it's Patrick Warburton. I did not know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, Patrick Warburton is like the voice of Buzz Lightyear when it's not Tim Allen, so that's kind of cool.
That's incredible. I've got a challenging one. I'm sure mine. I should have known the answer to your question. Mine. I like asking tough trivia questions for Disney, especially to Disney geeks like yourself. So in Flight of Passage, we have Dr.
I'm already done.
We have. It actually doesn't have too much to do with the attraction. It's kind of just more of a fun little Easter egg. So Dr. Stevens is the main pre-show person who introduces you to what you're going to experience with Flight of Passage. But Dr. Stevens is actually a tribute to a real person. Do you know who that person is?
Absolutely, Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Stevens, not Mr. Stevens.
No, Dr. Stevens is a tribute to like an Imagineer, perhaps?
It's someone who was in some way working for Disney.
Stevens. Ooh. Stevens.
It's not a very popular person, but it's someone who was maybe at one point in some sort of like video talking about specifically Animal Kingdom.
Stevens. Oh gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I'll throw this one to you because it's a
who is it?
So it's Dr. Beth Stevens, believe it or not, and she's the former vice president of Disney's Animal Kingdom.
Okay.
And she was the head of animal programs.
Not a popular person, you said?
Well, not popular, meaning not someone that the average Disney fan would know.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was somebody, would you say VP of Animal Kingdom?
She was the VP of Animal Kingdom, and she was also in charge of animal programs. So she has a PhD in, I think it is zoology, but she's someone who was responsible for figuring out how to safely incorporate and care for animals at Disney's Animal Kingdom, in addition to being the vice president of Disney's Animal Kingdom. So both her, to make it really interesting, so Dr. Stevens is based on the real Dr. Stevens, Dr. Beth Stevens, and Dr. Jackie Ogden, who's the head of the Pandora Conservation Initiative, is actually based on a real person named Dr. Jackie Ogden, who is the current vice president of animal programs at Walt Disney World.
I'd heard about.
Yeah,
that's that one I knew. That's
so
very cool.
They're both real people. The character, those are actors playing the roles of characters in Flight of Passage, but they're based on two real former and current heads of animal programs at Animal Kingdom.
What a cool tribute. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we go, why don't you let folks know what you do over at Imagineer Podcast?
Yeah, if you love all things Disney, definitely check us out. We cover all wide range of subjects. I think my specialty is really talking about attractions very deeply and diving into the specifics, either Easter eggs or fun facts or storylines. But if you head to just imagineerpodcast.com or look for Imagineer Podcast on social media or a podcast app, you'll find it. Check it out. We have a lot of fun discussions, and definitely reach out if you have any questions about the show.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Matt. This was a blast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. It was really a pleasure.
I hope you all enjoyed today's conversation. On the last couple of episodes, we talked about the virtual queue system required for Web Slingers, a Spider-Man adventure. Plus, I released an entire episode about the origins of Disney villain Cruella de Vil. Thanks to Jim Smith for sharing his thoughts on that episode by calling the DCTC hotline. You can find that hotline yourself in this episode's description. Here's what Jim had to say.
Hey, Jeff, this is Jim Smith calling from Hanover, Mass. Hey, I'm a brand new listener and therefore a first-time caller. I only just found out about your podcast literally last night. I listened this morning, and I listened to I found out about you from the Book of the Mouse Club, and you had Courtney on as your guest talking about Cruella, the classic Disney villain, one of those that you can't bear to just like them a little bit. I'm actually inspired by your podcast episode to do a blog post on some of those Disney villains that you can't help but just like, at least a little bit. But hey, I loved listening to the podcast. You guys had a great vibe, a great conversation. And man, you had an awful lot of cool things to say and some trivia to say about Corella. So I really appreciate that. I will be looking for further episodes in your back catalog, so you can bet I'll be calling again. And appreciate this finding this new podcast. I don't know how I haven't known about it before, but I know about it now, and that's what counts. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Thanks again, Jim, for calling in. Feel free to call back anytime. As you heard, Jim said, "I don't know how I haven't known about it before," referring to Disney Coast to Coast. Now, folks, believe it or not, there are still a lot of Disney fans who don't know about Disney Coast to Coast, so I have a personal favor to ask. If each of you listening sometime this week could take a moment and introduce Disney Coast to Coast to just one other person in a meaningful way, that would be a huge help in spreading the word. Word-of-mouth advertising is the absolute best as it's coming from someone trusted. Can you do this favor for me? I would really appreciate it. On the next episodes, there is a lot of Disney news to catch up on, including my thoughts on the Disney After Hours Boo Bash, and so much more. Plus, in a couple weeks, I have a very special guest visiting the show to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. You might just say that my guest co-host has really embodied Hunchback. The easiest way to make sure you don't miss any of the magic is by subscribing to Disney Coast to Coast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you search, don't forget it's Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast. You can find any links and info mentioned in this episode, along with ways to connect with today's guest co-host, by checking out the show notes link in this episode's description. Help ensure more free episodes of the podcast and gain rewards by joining the DCTC community at patreon.com/DisneyCTC, and don't forget to leave a voicemail at 818-860-2569 to share your thoughts on today's conversation and the chance to be heard on a future episode. What are some of your favorite Disney attractions that continue the story? You can find that phone number to call in this episode's description, along with a link for some free gifts from me to you. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at DePodcastNetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.